Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson. Well, I'm sure that most of the viewers of this channel are already aware that Alfred Brendel has died. Of course, Brendel retired from the concert platform many years ago. In fact, I was lucky enough when I was a student to hear one of his last concerts in 2008 in Severance Hall in Cleveland. He played Beethoven's C minor concerto with the Cleveland Orchestra, and that's an unforgettable experience that I had and still ranks as one of the best concerts that I've ever attended. I was very surprised on that occasion. Brendel gets a bad rap sometimes as being a pianist who had a very thin, kind of small tone, but actually his sound in the hall was very rich and very full and very penetrating. I was sitting in the back of the hall in Severance Hall, and I still remember how warm but still present his tone was. Right there in the back. Brendel, of course, was much more than just a pianist, though. He was also a thinker, an intellectual, a writer. There's not very many pianists, active concert pianists, I think, who have written so meaningfully and so insightfully about music and art in general and life. And books like the set of interviews, The Veil of Order, or his book of essays and lectures, Music, Sense, and Nonsense. These are books that have been with me for years and which I've read with great pleasure and with great enlightenment for many years. And definitely his approach to analysis and the way that he interacted with the score was very much an inspiration for my own approach towards musical analysis and a lot of what I do on this channel. He had a very excellent way of balancing the intellectual, pure intellectual, theoretical approach with a very fanciful and subjective, emotional approach to the music that he studied. And that part of his nature, I think, is oftentimes not well enough acknowledged. You know, Brendel was lauded as being kind of a structural, architectural player, and he definitely was that. There's definitely a sense of great stability and steadiness to his playing, but he also did have this kind of whimsical, humorous side to him. Anyone who's read any of his poetry or heard him recite his own poetry will know the kind of offbeat humor that he actually had lurking behind his exterior. So I thought I would share a few of my favorite Alfred Brendel recordings today, a few of the ones that really have meant the most to me over the years. Certainly I've been listening to Brendel recordings since my earliest experiences with piano music. So when I was just a tender lad, I had his recordings of the Beethoven sonatas. In particular, this recording, I don't know if anyone will recognize this cover from his very first Beethoven sonata cycle, which I think he later disavowed. But I love these recordings, and they were ones that introduced me to many of these sonatas for the very first time. In particular, I remember his recording of the Pastorale Sonata, Opus 28, as being one that absolutely entranced me when I was a youth. So I'd love to share a little bit of that recording, and it's really remarkable to me just the sense of wonderful intimacy and this kind of rapt poetic communication that Brendel really gets in this recording in particular. Something about the quality of the tone of this piano, which I suspect is not a Steinway, although I don't know for certain, but something about the tone of this piano is so intimate and so speaking. It's like really just an individual poet speaking to you directly. It really puts you in mind of the kind of intimacy that the pianos of Beethoven's day were really capable of, which sometimes you lose that on modern instruments to a great degree. So it's really remarkable how Brendel is able to preserve that in a recording like this. Yeah, it definitely doesn't sound quite like a Steinway. Maybe that's a European model, almost like sounds like a Bechstein or something like that. Has a very interesting, very intimate kind of sound quality. And when you hear just how freely he interprets this music, really, I mean, there's a lot of a sense of waywardness at times. Well controlled, though, kept within this kind of structural control. You really, you hear about Brendel being such an architectural kind of pianist and being such an intellectual. It's easy to forget that his favorite pianists, which he was at no hesitation to talk about frequently, were Alfred Cortot and Edwin Fischer, as well as Wilhelm Kempff. Pianists who were very far from being rigid intellectuals. Instead, they were really artists who, all in their own ways, thrived on the inspiration of the moment. And that's something that was very important to Brendel also, was finding this kind of special poetic inspiration in every performance that he gave. I think it's one of the reasons probably that later on he preferred to use live recordings for a lot of his releases, was simply because you could find that easier in live performance. But I think he did it in recordings too, often enough. And this recording, of course, is one of my favorites. The first movement is great, but the second movement is really the one that I listened to again and again when I was, 12 years old or however old I was. And it really encapsulates a lot of what I try to attain in movements like this, where there is really a poetic spirit. He does get this balance between his own ideas, his own kind of improvisatory spirit, and the meaning of Beethoven's composition. So let's hear a little bit of the second movement of this Pastoral Sonata, Opus 28. Yeah, so I really love that recording. I know that, of course, Brendel recorded all the Beethoven sonatas several more times, and he would no doubt have preferred if I'd selected one of his later recordings, but this is the one that I heard first and really made such an impression on me, and it still makes an enormous impression on me, the kind of hushed quality that he gives to his pianissimos, which are still very present and very speaking and very singing. So I think it's really amazing piano playing. It's a sort of piano playing that maybe isn't immediately appreciated by a lot of young people, but I think once you really can discern its qualities, it brings you back time and time again for more. So of course I couldn't talk about Alfred Brendel without talking about his Schubert playing, because that's one of the great achievements of his life was probably his contributions to how Schubert was understood. He took Schubert very seriously as a composer, as contrasted to many opinions on Schubert, which tend to pigeonhole him as a miniaturist who was uncomfortable with large-scale forms, a kind of composer who only worked on intuition and was unable to pull his larger works together. Brendel did not feel that this was a drawback. He basically agreed with the idea that Schubert oftentimes wrote in an intuitive way, but he did not feel that this led to his works being incomprehensible or poorly structured, quite the reverse. And there's something about the way that Brendel brings these works together while still acknowledging their wayward character, which is very, very powerful. Of course, I would recommend his various recordings of the last 3 piano sonatas, as well as the late 3 piano pieces. But I wanted to highlight another piece right now, which is the D major piano sonata, the D major piano sonata, Deutsche 850, which I've always found to be a very problematic piece. I think it's a very difficult piece to really make work. It can seem kind of discursive, and it's one of those pieces where Schubert's repetition can perhaps become a little tiring in certain performances. But I thought that Brendel really pulled this piece off in his various performances of it in a way that I've never heard equaled, really, by anyone else. Even Schnabel's recording doesn't quite have the same appeal to me. Something about the pacing, something about the way that he balances forward momentum with poetic license, it really works in a way that's quite remarkable. And again, I think it's an example, the way he plays many parts of this piece are examples of how free he really could be. I think we have a tendency maybe to see pianists like Brendel of his generation as being kind of literalists or enslaved to the score or something like that. But that was very much against Brendel's philosophy. If you've read his writings, you know, he was very much about trying to get the inner meaning of the music out. Always, he was about the spirit of the composition, not necessarily the letter always, although he certainly paid attention to the letter of the score as well. That again goes back to his great loves as pianists, Cortot and Fischer and so forth. So in the last movement of the D major sonata, it's really quite striking to me the kind of sound that he goes for. It's not necessarily what you would expect just based upon what you see in the notation. So for example, here's a little clip from the last movement played by Arthur Schnabel, another very important Schubert player, another very important pianist. I think that Schnabel's way of playing it is probably more in line with what you might just assume how it should go just based on the text. So here's a little bit of what it sounds like. So there you have that. So, and that is really one of the great recordings of this piece as well. It's one that I really love. But you can hear in that example, he's He plays the left hand very, very short and staccato. So he takes the staccato markings that Schubert writes very literally and plays it in a very playful, kind of lively way. So I think that's more the kind of direct approach to that movement. Brendel has a very different kind of poetic conception of this movement, though, which I think was very much his own. I mean, if anyone knows where Brendel might have gotten this from, let me know, but I think it's really his own way of doing it, which has been, I've definitely heard imitated since then. This is one of Brendel's earlier recordings, again, a video performance that he did. And just listen to the kind of sound quality that he gets. He uses a much more pedal, and he kind of bathes the music in this kind of halo, almost like a nostalgic vision of childhood instead of an actual depiction, a photographic depiction of childhood. So it's quite individual and quite remarkable and again, quite poetic. And I wish people acknowledge this side of Brendel's character more, I think, when they talk about his playing. So, yeah, that's a really beautiful example. And I thought also maybe I'd play a little bit of the third movement of this sonata too, because that's one of the worst offenders. It's a very difficult movement to make work, a scherzo movement. It's a little bit like Schumann. It's full of dotted rhythms. Over and over again, dotted rhythms, repeating dotted rhythms. And people tend to get a little bit stuck in this movement, I find. It can sound kind of impersonal. And Brendel, though, somehow accomplishes the impossible. He somehow makes it very, very infectious. Somehow the rhythm is very strong and very well controlled, but he still has room for flexibility. So it just works better than any other recording I've heard so far of this movement anyway. great. And so I just think it's wonderful. He really captures the charm and the kind of breezy Viennese quality, but he never gives up the intensity of the rhythm. So what else do I need to talk about? A few other recordings I have to highlight. Well, so far I guess I've been showing a little bit more of Brendel on in his more contemplative mood, but he had oodles of piano technique as well. He could look kind of tense in his way of playing the piano. Certainly in his body, he might have looked kind of tense. But he was quite capable of playing remarkable, he had remarkable technical capabilities, actually, which he didn't always make use of. Of course, he played a lot of Liszt, and although his approach to Liszt is maybe not entirely my favorite, I do really respect and admire his thoughts on Liszt and the degree to which he really campaigned for a correct understanding of Liszt's music and for really understanding his output in the right way, not necessarily prioritizing all the flashy virtuoso works, but instead the pieces that were really examples of Liszt the composer, the individual composer. So certainly that required a virtuoso technique, which he showed to great effect. But also, there are early recordings of him playing things like the Norma Fantasy and Balakirev's Islamé, which are definitely not easy works at all, in which he plays with perfect control and technical finesse. You can also hear that along with his kind of wit and charm that he was capable and sparkle that was really a part of his playing in places like this section from the finale of Mozart's B-flat Concerto, K456. So he's absolutely making the piano crackle there. And I should mention here that his recording of his traversal of the almost complete Mozart concerti, he only skips the first few juvenile concerti, which were based on other people's works anyway. He plays all the original concerti that Mozart wrote later on. And that first cycle that he made with Neville Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin's remains one of my favorite collections to dip into. It's one of the great recordings of the Mozart piano concertos. It's probably that one, and then also Murray Pariah's recording is probably another one that you would hold up. But I love it. And I wanted to highlight, besides that movement, a couple others as well. I particularly like his recording of the G Major Concerto 453, so I wanted to play a little bit of that. This is a little bit unusual, I think, again. I think these are maybe one of the first recordings that he made from the set, and you'll notice that there's a much more kind of distant, almost fairy-like sound to the piano. It's very warm and but a little distant. And I think in his later recordings, he went for a little bit more of a brilliant and present kind of sound in the piano. But I actually really like that effect, this more poetic, distant effect in this particular concerto, which I think is such an ethereal kind of work. So listen to the kind of effects that he gets in conjunction with the orchestra. The way that the piano kind of blends into the orchestra tone is really beautiful and really appropriate, I think, for this work. Here's a little bit from the first movement. Good. And let's also hear a little bit from the slow movement also. I do recommend the entire cycle so this is with Neville Marriner and Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. And in particular, I really love his recording of number 12 also in A major. I think that's K414. And the big C major one, K503, one of the later ones, number 25, I think that is. So well worth taking a listen to all that. So I hope that this has intrigued you a little bit about Brendel's output, and perhaps you might want to go and reevaluate some of his recordings and get to know his playing a little bit better. There's so many things, of course, that he did that I haven't even really touched on in this video. It's a little bit outside the scope, perhaps, of this little tribute. Of course, he did wonderful playing of some 20th century music, for example, Schoenberg. He was a wonderful exponent of a lot of that music, including the piano concerto. He has a wonderful recording of the Schoenberg piano concerto. And of course, I haven't played any of his list for you, but you can find a very lovely video of him playing the first two books of the Année de Pèlerinage wonderfully on YouTube. And they are really superlative performances in his own style, and well worth taking a look at. He was also a wonderful chamber musician, of course, and leader accompanist. And one of his greatest recordings, which in my opinion, which I'll leave you with, was the time that he teamed up with Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, a legendary, of course, German singer, and exponent of this repertoire, of the lead repertoire. No one did more for Schubert, Schumann, Wolf, Brahms, and so forth than Fischer-Dieskau. And this still is my favorite recording of Die Winterreise, is this video performance that he did with Fischer-Dieskau a little later in Dieskau's career, but he still sounds amazing. I'll leave you with the last piece from that cycle, Der Leiermann. So I hope you enjoyed this little video, and please come back next week. I'll, of course, have more music, more conversation then. So cheers until then.
Drüben hinterm Dorfe steht ein Leiermann. Und mit starren Fingern dreht was kann. Barfuß auf dem Eise wankt hin und her. Und sein kleiner Teller bleibt ihm immer leer. Und sein kleiner